Have you ever met someone who changed your entire life in just one night? What if I told you that one conversation with a complete stranger on a train would lead me to question everything I thought I knew about myself? What happens when the person you're drawn to turns out to be someone you should never have met? I'm about to tell you something I've never told anyone before, something that haunts me every single day. My name doesn't matter. But what happened to me on that night train 3 years ago will stay with me forever. It was December 15th, and I was taking the overnight train from Chicago to Denver. I had just quit my job at the accounting firm after discovering my boss was embezzling money from client accounts. I couldn't be part of that corruption anymore, even if it meant losing my steady income as a 28-year-old man trying to build his career. The train was my escape, my way of starting fresh in a new city where nobody knew my name. The compartment was nearly empty, except for one other passenger. She sat 3 rows ahead of me, her silhouette visible against the window as city lights blurred past. There was something magnetic about her presence, the way she held herself with quiet confidence. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore a burgundy coat that seemed expensive, sophisticated. I tried to focus on my book, but my eyes kept drifting toward her. Every few minutes, I'd catch glimpses of her profile when she turned to look out the window. There was a sadness in her posture that I recognized, the same heaviness I'd been carrying since losing my job and watching my life fall apart. Around midnight, she got up and walked to the observation car. Something compelled me to follow her. I told myself I just needed some air, but deep down, I knew I was drawn to her like a moth to flame. The observation car was dimly lit, with large windows offering a panoramic view of the countryside, rushing by in darkness. She was standing at the far end, hands pressed against the glass. When she heard my footsteps, she turned around, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with piercing green eyes that seemed to look right through me. But it wasn't just her beauty that stopped me in my tracks. It was the pain I saw there, raw and unmistakable. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, her voice soft and melodic with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. I walked closer, feeling like I was in some kind of trance. "No," I replied. "Too much on my mind, I guess." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I know that feeling well. We started talking, and it was as if we'd known each other for years. She told me her name was Elena, and she was traveling to start a new life after leaving behind everything she'd ever known. I shared my own story about quitting my job and feeling lost, uncertain about my future. There was an instant connection between us that I'd never experienced before. Hours passed like minutes as we talked about everything and nothing. She had this way of listening that made me feel understood, truly seen for the first time in years. When I mentioned my ex-fiancé who had left me for my best friend 6 months earlier, Elena placed her hand on mine. The touch sent electricity through my entire body. "Some people come into our lives to teach us lessons about ourselves," she said, her fingers intertwining with mine, "even when those lessons are painful." I found myself leaning closer to her, drawn by an invisible force I couldn't resist. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but my heart had already made its choice. As dawn approached, we were sitting close together on one of the observation benches. She told me about her childhood in Romania, how she'd immigrated to America with dreams of becoming a doctor, but had to give up those dreams when life took unexpected turns. I shared stories about my own abandoned dreams of becoming a writer, how I'd settled for accounting because it was safe and predictable. "What if we didn't have to be alone anymore?" she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. The question hung in the air between us like a promise and a threat. I knew I was standing at a crossroads, that whatever happened next would change everything. But I was tired of being careful, tired of living a life that felt half empty. When the train pulled into a small station for a brief stop, Eleanor suggested we get off and explore the town together. "Just for a few hours," she said. "We can catch the next train." Every instinct told me it was a bad idea, but I couldn't say no to her. We grabbed our bags and stepped off into the crisp morning air. The town was quaint and sleepy, with old-fashioned storefronts and tree-lined streets. We found a small diner and shared breakfast, talking and laughing like old friends. Eleanor had this infectious energy that made me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. For those few hours, all my problems seemed to disappear. But as we walked through the town center, I noticed something strange. Elena kept checking her phone and glancing around nervously. When I asked if everything was okay, she assured me it was just habit. "Old fears die hard," she said with a forced smile. I should have pressed her for more details, but I was too caught up in the magic of the moment. We spent the day exploring antique shops and walking through a nearby park. Elena bought me a small silver locket from one of the shops, telling me it would help me remember this day when times got tough. Inside the locket was a tiny photo of a flower. Delicate and beautiful, I treasured that gift, wearing it around my neck like a talisman. As evening approached, we found ourselves at the edge of town, where an old cemetery stretched across a hillside. Elena seemed drawn to it, walking among the weathered headstones with a reverence that surprised me. She stopped in front of one particular grave, a newer marker that stood out among the aged monuments. "My grandmother is buried here," she said quietly. "I haven't visited her grave in over 2 years." I stood beside her, reading the inscription, "Maria Popescu, beloved mother and grandmother." The dates showed she had died just 3 years earlier. "I'm sorry," I said, placing my hand on Elena's shoulder. She leaned into me, and I held her as she quietly wept. In that moment, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. We spent another hour in the cemetery as Elena told me stories about her grandmother, how she had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. That night, we checked into a small bed and breakfast, sharing a room that overlooked the town square. What happened between us that night was intense and passionate, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Elena moved like she was trying to memorize every moment, as if she knew it would be our last. I should have recognized that desperation for what it was. In the morning, I woke up alone. Elena's clothes were gone, and there was no sign she had ever been there except for the lingering scent of her perfume on the pillows. I rushed downstairs to ask the desk clerk, but he claimed no one named Elena had checked in. According to him, I had requested a single room and paid for it myself. Confused and heartbroken, I searched the town for her, visiting every place we had been together. The antique shop owner had no memory of us buying the locket. The diner waitress insisted I had eaten breakfast alone. It was as if Elena had never existed, except for the locket around my neck and the memories burned into my heart. I caught the next train to Denver, spending the entire journey trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I having some kind of mental breakdown brought on by stress and loneliness? But the locket was real, solid proof that Elena had existed, that our connection had been genuine. For months after arriving in Denver, I tried to find her. I searched social media, contacted immigration services, even hired a private investigator. No one named Elena Popescu had entered the country recently. No one matching her description had any record of existing. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air and then vanished just as mysteriously. The mystery consumed me. I couldn't focus on finding a new job or building a new life because I was obsessed with finding answers. I returned to that small town twice, hoping to uncover some clue I had missed. On my second visit, I decided to research the cemetery records, thinking maybe I could learn something about Elena through her grandmother's grave. That's when I discovered the truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about that magical night. According to the cemetery records, Maria Popescu had indeed died 3 years earlier. But there was something else in the file that made my blood run cold. Maria Popescu had only had one granddaughter. Her name was Elena Popescu, and she had died in a car accident with her parents when she was 12 years old. The woman I had spent that incredible night with, the woman I had fallen in love with, had been dead for over 15 years. The dates were clear, documented, undeniable. Elena Popescu had been buried in the same cemetery where we had stood together, in a small grave just 20 feet from her grandmother's monument. I stood in that cemetery, staring at Elena's headstone, trying to process what I was seeing. Her photograph was embedded in the marble, and it was unmistakably the face of the woman I had met on the train, 12 years old when she died, but somehow appearing to me as the adult she never got the chance to become. The rational part of my mind rejected what the evidence was telling me. Ghosts weren't real. Dead people didn't fall in love with the living. But I couldn't deny what I had experienced, the physical connection we had shared, the conversations that had felt more real than anything in my ordinary life. The locket around my neck seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. I spent weeks researching Elena's story, piecing together the tragic details of her short life. She had been a brilliant student who dreamed of becoming a doctor, just as she had told me. Her parents had been driving her to a medical camp for gifted children when their car was hit by a drunk driver on a rainy night in November. All three died instantly. But why had she appeared to me? Why had she chosen that moment, that train, to make contact with the world of the living? I found the answer in a letter Elena had written to her grandmother just days before the accident. The letter was preserved in the town's historical society, part of a collection donated by Maria Popescu before her own death. In the letter, Elena had written about feeling lonely and misunderstood, about wanting to find someone who would truly see her for who she was. She wrote about her dreams of traveling, of meeting someone who would love her completely. "I want to experience real love before I die," she had written in her neat 12-year-old handwriting. "I want to know what it feels like to be cherished by someone who understands my heart." Reading those words, I understood that Elena had somehow lingered in this world, waiting for her chance to experience the love and connection that had been stolen from her by tragedy. I had been chosen to fulfill that longing, to give her one perfect night of feeling truly alive and loved. But understanding didn't make the loss any less painful. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I struggled with depression, unable to form connections with living women because they all seemed pale and shallow compared to what I had experienced with Elena. I questioned my sanity daily, wondering if I was losing my grip on reality. The locket became both a comfort and a curse, proof of our connection, but also a constant reminder of what I could never have again. I finally sought help from a therapist who specialized in grief and trauma. Dr. Williams didn't dismiss my story or try to convince me it had all been a hallucination. Instead, she helped me understand that some experiences transcend our normal understanding of reality. Whether Elena had been a ghost, a vivid dream, or something else entirely, the impact she had on my life was real and valid. Through months of therapy, I learned to carry my experience with Elena as a gift rather than a burden. She had appeared at a time when I was lost and broken, showing me that love and connection were still possible even in my darkest moments. She had reminded me that life was meant to be lived fully, not just endured safely from the sidelines. I kept the locket, but stopped obsessing over finding logical explanations for what had happened. Instead, I focused on honoring Elena's memory by living the kind of life she never got the chance to experience. I started writing again, pouring my emotions into stories that helped others feel less alone. I volunteered at a children's hospital, working with kids who were facing their own battles with mortality. 1 year after our encounter, I returned to the cemetery on the anniversary of the night we met. I brought flowers for both Elena and her grandmother, sitting beside their graves, as I told Elena about the changes in my life. The wind picked up as I spoke, rustling the leaves in a way that felt like an answer, like approval. I felt her presence one last time, a gentle warmth that seemed to whisper, "Thank you," before fading away. I still wear the locket Elena gave me, and sometimes I catch glimpses of her in my peripheral vision or hear her laughter in the wind. But I know now that she's at peace, having experienced the love and connection she had longed for. Our night together had been her gift to me, but more importantly, it had been my gift to her, allowing her spirit to finally rest. My darkest secret isn't that I fell in love with a ghost, it's that I'm grateful it happened, even knowing the pain it would cause. Elena taught me that love transcends death, that connection can exist beyond the boundaries of what we think is possible. She showed me that even in our deepest loneliness, we are never truly alone. That experience changed how I see the world, how I approach relationships with women, how I value each moment of connection with another soul. I learned that sometimes the most profound encounters in our lives come from the most unexpected sources, and that opening our hearts to love, even when it seems impossible, is always worth the risk. Some nights, when I'm traveling on trains or walking through quiet towns, I find myself hoping I might encounter another lost soul seeking connection. Because I know now that we all have the power to heal each other, to provide the love and understanding that makes existence meaningful, whether we're among the living or something beyond. If you've made it this far in my story, I want you to know that you're not alone in your struggles or your longing for connection. Sometimes the most important relationships in our lives come in forms we never expected, and sometimes the greatest gifts are wrapped in the deepest mysteries. Don't let fear keep you from opening your heart to the impossible. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, please subscribe to Top Life Stories for more incredible tales of human connection and the mysteries that bind us together across the boundaries of life and death.